Hi everyone, I'm Phivos, and today I'm going to talk to you about my biased brain and its story with science communication. Now, I was going to introduce myself, but since this is a story about my biased brain and myself, I'm just going to go straight to it. First of all, I want to talk about brain biases or cognitive biases. As you can see in this slide, scientists have identified quite a decent number of cognitive biases. A cognitive bias is some sort of a mistake or an error that our brain makes during information processing. Now, when we try to process information, in order to save resources, many times our brains might connect some dots that are not supposed to be connected, or we might miss some of the information. And we might end up making some decisions that are not quite the best due to these errors. Obviously, we're not going to talk about all these biases today, but I want to share with you quite a few that I have come across up to now. I'm going to start by sharing with you that I'm a psychologist. When I tell people this, the first thing that comes to their mind is this. Oh, he's probably some guy that has an office and then people visit his office to share some struggles, and in return, he helps them with the struggles. However, that's not the kind of psychologist that I tend to be during my everyday life. I'm a cognitive scientist. I work with a healthy brain, trying to understand how people think during everyday life. A psychologist is not necessarily a clinician or someone that helps people with everyday issues. Many of the psychologists just study how humans behave, how they deal with emotion, or how they think. You probably already watched, or you're planning to watch, the amazing presentation by my very good friend, Marianna. The conversation that I just had with you was something that me and Marianna had during dinner. We always seem to struggle with people when we tell them that we are psychologists, because they tend to make this association with their clinicians. So during that conversation, we realized that we were facing the false cause fallacy. The false cause fallacy is the situation when people connect two events that seem to appear together pretty often and believe that one causes the other. So in other words, as soon as people hear psychologist, they have this idea of clinical psychologists and tend to believe that every psychologist works with other individuals, helping them with overcoming some everyday issues. In another example, Tyler Vigen has created and actually published a book with a lot of events that seem to be related to each other, but in reality have absolutely no association between them. In this case, you can see the number of films in the black line that Nicolas Cage appeared in, and in the red line, you can see the number of people that drowned by falling into a pool. Now, as you can see, these two lines have a pretty high correlation. A correlation is a statistical term which, in simple words, can show us the relationship between two events. So even though these are very, very correlated or related between them, in reality, they have absolutely nothing to do with each other. It was just a lucky situation. Now, what does the false cause fallacy tell us about science communication? Well, the first thing is that we have to be very clear when communicating our results. We have to be transparent on what the results indicate and what they do not indicate. Using examples can be a very great way to help the audience understand what the results mean for their everyday life and what does it mean for the audience. And lastly, it reminds us that even though sometimes our results are not clear enough, or sometimes we should have done something better to understand our results. However, in order to produce good science, we should always focus on methodology. As long as we were rigorous enough and we were following a plan for specific reasons, then we can be confident that our work was very decent. Also, we should be able to acknowledge the limitations of our work and criticize what are some things that we could have done better. Another thing I want to share with you is that one of my hobbies is weightlifting. If you were to ask me a few years ago, I was going to tell you that I am a weightlifter. But the choice of words that I use now is that one of my hobbies is weightlifting. The reason that I switched the choice of wording is an incident that, lucky for you, I caught on camera and I can share it with you today. On this day, I've realized that I have been a victim of the Danny Kruger effect. The Danny Kruger effect, it's an effect that describes that the less experience we have in some situation, the more confident we are. Now, when I used to say that I'm a weightlifter, my experience level was pretty low and my confidence level was very high. So here's me telling people that I'm a weightlifter. Today, as I gained some experience in weightlifting, my confidence dropped. And right now I'm around here. And this is me telling people that one of my hobbies is weightlifting. Now, the Dunning-Kruger effect also explains that after getting enough experience, our confidence levels start to rise again until a point where we become experts and we can be pretty confident about our work. So what does this tell us about science communication? Well, first of all, is that we should gain confidence from the procedure. As long as we know what we did and what the rationale behind what we did was, then we can be confident in our work. Also, we should be ready for a tough crowd. There's a high probability that we're going to face individuals that have greater confidence. Is that confidence due to expertise or is it due to lack of expertise? In any case, we should be able to evaluate if we can discuss. And this brings me to the next point, which is that we should accept ignorance. It's perfectly okay if you do not know the answer to a question. We should be aware of the things that we do not know, and we should also be aware of how we can learn the things that we don't know. It's perfectly fine if someone asks you a question and your response is something in the lines of, to be honest, I am not aware how to answer this question. I do not know the answer to this question, but I'm more than happy to look into it and return to you once I have some more information. or it's perfectly fine to ask if someone else has the answer to that question. Moving back to the psychology part, this is Sigmund Freud. It's one of the most influential figures in the field of psychology. Now, you might not be aware of this, but many psychologists are currently in a huge debate whether they support or not Sigmund Freud. When I was studying for my bachelor degree, I was aware of this debate, and to be honest, I wasn't sure on which side of the debate I was, and I'm pretty sure that I'm still fighting to understand if I support the ideas of Freud or not. However, I've noticed that during my studies, I fell a victim of the halo effect as well. Now, the halo effect is something that explains the fact that when we find a positive trait in somebody, we tend to overgeneralize this positiveness throughout the whole figure. This means that often when people share their ideas or their thoughts, we are more likely to get influenced by those ideas since we have this positive attitude towards that person. A few days ago, I found some of Freud's writing, which went viral online, and I'm sharing it with you today. As you can see in the slide, in this piece of writing, Freud said, "I gave my lecture yesterday. Despite lack of preparation, I spoke quite well and without hesitation, which I ascribed to the cocaine I had taken beforehand. I told about my discoveries in brain anatomy, all very difficult things that the audience certainly didn't understand, but all that matters is that they get the impression that I understand it." Now, this is a brilliant piece, and it can teach us a lot of things about science communication. The first thing is that you should avoid using cocaine, which reminds me that humor is always welcomed when communicating. Also, communication is for the audience. It's not about ourselves. Freud said that all that matters is that I gave the impression that I understand the stuff that I was talking about. However, that's totally missing the point. The reason you're aiming to communicate is in order for the audience to figure out what you're trying to do or what you're trying to share with them. One brilliant reminder that can help us when communicating is to try to remember how we would explain it to a 5-year-old. If a 5-year-old fails to understand what we're trying to say, then we're not communicating it good enough. Lastly, this writing piece that I shared with you in the previous slide reminds us that reliable sources when communicating, especially scientific work, are vital. When I first came across this piece of writing, I tried to double check that it was indeed Freud's. And after looking into many, many sources, I figured out that there was nothing to trace it back to Freud. So up to today, we're pretty unsure if that's a true story. So in his many writings, did Freud indeed write that? Looks like he didn't. And this serves as a great reminder that we might come across a lot of information, but we should also double check the sources, and we should always make sure that what we're sharing with the audience is something trustworthy. This brings me to today. Today, I work in a brain lab, My work is trying to understand how people remember information in the brain. So, what areas of the brain are employed during short-term memory? Many scientists have studied memory, and some of the things that we tend to agree on is that our memory, our short-term memory, has a very limited capacity. We cannot remember many things. One way that seems to benefit memory is stories. Storytelling is very important. It's been in our lives ever since we were young, through books, for example, or when we watch a series or movies. And also, storytelling is in our everyday lives, for example, when we're coming across conspiracy theories. Building a story around something that we're trying to remember, or building a story across a lot of information, can help the remembrance of the information. That's exactly the reason why I decided to build this presentation as a story about Phivos. I think instead of remembering the false cause fallacy or the Danny Kruger effect or the halo effect, it's going to be a lot easier for you to remember this guy, Phivos, who studied psychology, but not that kind of psychology, who was a weightlifter, or as he likes to say, one of his hobbies is weightlifting, and who also secretly liked Freud, which made him a victim of the halo effect. That's all I had to share with you today. Thank you very much for watching this, and I hope that this story stays with you